Wendy here. This is kind of scary, to be honest. Welcome to another episode of Wild and Precious Conversations. I've had an interesting week, and so I am doing for the second time a video podcast for a few reasons. One of the reasons is because the topic for this week is becoming real, and I thought I'd challenge myself. I thought I'd challenge myself to really, truly just show up and see what happened in my body as I showed up, really, just out of bed. The theme this week is conversation. And as I mentioned in the newsletter, I had a series of really, really lovely encounters toward the end of the week, last week, that made me realize that my focus is conversation, dialogue, and what needs to happen in order for that to happen in our lives. As I've moved through this week, and I really would encourage you to go and read the newsletter. I think it would help to follow this podcast episode. And maybe just to mention that what was starting to float through my mind was that quote that's often misattributed to Voltaire. But like many quotes that I've come across it to somebody super famous and male, and often European or North American, this quote was by named Evelyn Beatrice Hall, and just her phrase of how he felt about the world. And I'm going to paraphrase wholeheartedly with what you say, but I will defend to my death your right to say it. And I realized that there's a lot in that quote. First of all, I mean, defend to my death, my God. But also just that holding tight to, yeah, let's lean in. God, that turn of phrase has gotten so co-opted and misused, but let's literally lean in to our friends and our enemies and our acquaintances. And when they say something that really tweaks our irritation or whatever, I would put forward that an appropriate and learn. I feel like there's nothing wrong, I don't think, with advocating for yourself. Of course. And I do feel like there's a place for that. But if it's not at least equal, or I would almost suggest let the percentage be 60% learning and 40% add more. I question, I question that. Not to say I don't do it all the time. I'm definitely in there. But as of late last week, and moving into this week, I am noticing a lot that when I try to shift my intention to be one of really learning, where is this other human being coming from? And can we sit in that, as I've termed it now, again, with a hat tip to both Lisa Richardson and Marla Estes, as we sit in this really warm, nurturing compost. And yes, that's a euphemism for the SHIT that life sometimes hands us. When it becomes a nurturing compost heap, compost pile, and again, I'm not a biologist, but from what I understand, it's very warm in a good, healthy compost. when we're sitting in that nurturing pile of shit, um, with another human, you know, think about the growth. And I imagine that when we try to just turn that lovely, nourishing compost heap into a platform, a soapbox for us to yet convince this other person more about what we think without understanding that a good portion of it, there needs to be an exchange, a dialogue, a conversation. I do think then, and gosh, I love this metaphor because it holds. I do think then that that compost heap, pile, whatever, turns into toxic sludge. Are you with me? I think I've got something here with this metaphor in it. God, I love metaphors. So I was contemplating that a lot. And I woke up to and I'm going to find it here and read it, and I hope it doesn't get too awkward. I found a lovely quote by Martin Luther King Jr. He has a speech called I believe it's called the Riverside Church speech. He said it, he gave that speech very shortly before I was born. So April 4th, 1967, a long, long time ago. In that speech, he said something that hit me, and I'm going to read it now. I'll try to read it as a professional orator so I don't stare down the whole time, but I'm not that good at this. I'm just learning. I'm convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation, and I would say as a world, must undergo a radical revolution of values. Can't believe he said this 54 years, is it 55 years ago? Nearly. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society. Did we do that? Can you imagine? 55 years ago. We must radically shift from a thing-oriented society. You can tell this is making me passionate. I hope I have my listening ears open and I'm not just proselytizing and on my soapbox because I don't want to be in a toxic sludge heap or whatever. But listen, this is from 1967. When machines and computers. Did we even have computers? I'm just being silly. Of course we did. When machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, militarism, and materialism are incapable of being conquered. I honestly, when I woke up to that, I just thought, well, there you go. There you go. And this goes so far beyond many of the things that divide us. I mean, honestly, I would love to sit down with a person who wants to be thing-oriented and listen to them. Sure, let me listen to them. In fact, actually, I think I mean that wholeheartedly. If there is a person who feels that those things that Dr. King mentioned are how we should orient our society, I imagine that I would like to live in a different society, but I'm willing to listen because maybe there's something that we're all missing. And I do believe, though, that what is happening is that we're just simply out of practice. I've been having a really interesting week. So it is now Thursday morning, so this is going to be very close to live. I've had a very interesting week, full of listening. And often what I'm hearing and noticing is that we're deeply, deeply out of practice, including myself, out of practice with simply being human. What that would mean, in my mind, is that, and I've got a list here, so I'm going to read it from the blog post that I just wrote. Yeah, I wrote, if our thoughts and prayers, if we consider ourselves under the tents of Abraham, so that would be a Jewish person, a Christian person, or a Muslim person, and I don't know at this point whether that can expand beyond those three that I'm mostly familiar with. But if our thoughts and prayers don't also include going into the trenches with our friends and enemies, sitting quietly with them, listening to them, learning what they need and what is not being heard, then we are failing. And I then wrote the secular humanists among us, I imagine, know this well. And I wonder sometimes if that's where that rift is between people who consider themselves people of faith. And I don't know, again, I'm well versed enough in Sikh, and I think that's a branch of Hindu, and Buddhism and Buddhism. And I mean, I'm interested in lots of different faith traditions, but the ones I'm most familiar with are the tents of Abraham. I definitely also have focused on the material at certain junctures, and I'm realizing what a fault that is. And I ask in this blog post, and I'd like to now ask it here, to consider your day. And consider, and again, I'm asking myself, what percentage of your day is spent doing things that humans do? Comforting each other and yourself, encouraging, wandering in nature, caring for each other, mending, creating, growing. What percentage of your day is spent outdoors or in natural light? What percentage of your day is spent calmly, quietly listening to another human? Not trying to convince another human of something, not trying to coerce or persuade, not talking about superficial stuff only. How much of your day is spent in natural, not human-made surroundings? And I realize there's a bit of a fallacy or a little bit of a glitch in my metaphor, because if I'm talking about, it's interesting, because if you're talking about a human life, and what I'm starting to formulate in my mind as being very human, it's when we take ourselves out of completely linear, human-made structures. I'm literally picturing Joe versus the volcano. So if you haven't seen that movie, go watch it. But in any case, I'll work on that. But in natural, sort of soft surroundings, I would say, not linear, right-angled surroundings. Whatever. What percentage of your day is spent playing music? I could go on. And I did think, after I wrote that, I contemplated a bit and went on and realized I'm not asking what percentage of your day appears to be that. I don't really care how blissful or natural your life appears to be. I really do care how real it is. Man, this is difficult for me not to edit out that sentence, and I'm not going to, because I repeated real. One of my very favorite books of all time is The Velveteen Rabbit. The subtitle for that book is How Toys Become Real. It's a book that honestly brings me to tears, I think, every single time I've ever read it. I once read it to my second son's kindergarten class when he was still in school, and I cried. The little ones were just riveted. It's a lovely, lovely, lovely book. I'm going to paraphrase the book, and I may have gotten a little wrong. This is my memory. It's the story of a young boy who ended up with scarlet fever and who loved his stuffed rabbit very, very much. He loved it so much that it ended up with a little missing fur, and I believe its button eye was loosened, maybe missing. It's exactly, I think, really, kind of what we mean when we say something's well-loved. In the end, when the boy's belongings all needed to be burned, because this book was written quite a long time ago, to make sure that the scarlet fever was completely gone, and joining the other rabbits in the garden. You really should read the book. I think that that's what I'm doing, is trying to awkwardly moving toward a life that is becoming real. And that, I'm just going to say it here now. Sometimes that can be a little lonely. As I show up more and more often, as real as I possibly can be, that's why I decided to do what I'm doing this morning. We'll see if that's a good idea or not. But I find that I'm naturally gravitating toward people who are also wanting to become real. And I'm noticing a joy in the mutual recognition when we both kind of go, oh, you too? Come on, let's go. When I began this project little over 2 years ago, I only knew I've never done, well, no, actually, that's not true. I have done things like this in my past. But this felt really, not dramatic, but I only knew that I wanted to begin to use my writing, my passion for mental health, and my hobby for programming, my love for programming, to a purpose-driven end. It's all I knew. I had no idea where I was going. At various junctures early on, especially, I would sometimes say, well, this is what I'm doing. I kind of thought, no, you have no idea. Just admit it. And the more I went along with this project called Underbelly Project, which is, as somebody who considers herself a content strategist, that's a really dumb name. And I knew that. I mean, then the projects that sort of spun off of the Underbelly Project, I started terming Wild and Precious, which again is well, it's not as bad. But in any case, I just went, this is what I'm going to do now. This is what I'm going to do now in a completely organic, heart-driven way. Until 2 and a couple months in, here I am. And I'm noticing that as my life awkwardly and sometimes painfully blossoms, I understand this project is about becoming real. It's about making peace with myself and asking others to make peace with themselves. It's about training to become freer, less obedient to the world, to a thing-oriented society, more joyful. I'm at a point where I'd really like to invite you in. I feel ready. My weekly newsletter sets you up for a week of inquiry and practice, and no, you won't become more productive. You won't become richer. You won't gain any fashion sense. You might, though, become real. And yeah, I'd like to invite you in. I still don't know exactly where we're going. It's a very organic, love that word, process. The best I can say, I think, is that I am in the process of creating a very nutritious compost. And yes, that's a euphemism. and I'd like to invite you in so that we can grow together. Take care. Have a lovely, lovely week. If you know anyone else who might want to become real with us, you know what to do.